They toasted with champagne as the family business changed hands, completely unaware that Grandpa had entrusted me with his most valuable assets, hidden in plain sight. By Monday morning, they'd discover that they had sold nothing but an empty shell. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When my grandfather, Samuel Reynolds, passed away 3 months ago, the entire family gathered at his sprawling farmhouse in Oak Ridge Valley. The same farmhouse where I'd spent countless summers learning the intricate details of Reynolds' agricultural supply, the business my grandfather had built from nothing over 60 years. Growing up, I was always the quiet one, the bookish granddaughter, who seemed more interested in ledgers than the glamorous lives my cousins pursued in the city. While they visited occasionally for holiday gatherings, I spent weekends and summers working alongside Grandpa Sam, absorbing everything about the regional agricultural supply business that had become the backbone of our rural community. "You have a mind for this, Victoria," Grandpa would say as I meticulously organized inventory systems or suggested improvements to delivery routes. "You see patterns where others just see numbers." My cousins Ryan and Melissa, along with my Uncle Philip, tolerated what they saw as my quaint fascination with Grandpa's old-fashioned business. They never bothered to understand the complex network of relationships with farmers across 3 states, the carefully negotiated supplier contracts, or the landholdings strategically acquired over decades. During the reading of the will, everyone appeared shocked when Grandpa Sam named me Victoria Reynolds as the primary inheritor of Reynolds Agricultural Supply. The business had grown to include 5 locations, substantial real estate holdings, and contracts with nearly every major farm within a 100-mile radius. My cousins sat stunned as the lawyer detailed my majority stake in the company. Uncle Philip's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered once the lawyer finished. "Victoria knows nothing about running a business of this scale. She's just a girl who helped with bookkeeping." His dismissal stung, but I remained silent. Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Donovan, continued reading, explaining that a board of directors would be established with family members, including Uncle Philip, Ryan, and Melissa, each receiving minority shares and board positions. Samuel believed in family governance, Mr. Donovan explained, adjusting his glasses. He wanted Reynolds Agricultural Supply to remain a family enterprise with Victoria at the helm. I watched my cousins exchange glances across the room. Ryan, who'd failed at 3 startup ventures in the city, was already calculating his potential payout. Melissa, who'd never worked a day in the business, was likely planning how to leverage her new board position into social capital among her friends. Uncle Philip, who'd always resented being the younger brother to my grandfather, was undoubtedly plotting how to wrest control from his inexperienced niece. "We should meet tomorrow to discuss transition plans," I suggested after the reading concluded. "I've been preparing some strategies for expanding our services to smaller family farms that—" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Victoria," Uncle Philip interrupted, his tone patronizing. "This is a lot for everyone to process. We should take some time before making any decisions." I nodded agreeably, already recognizing the familiar pattern. Delay, dismiss, diminish. It was the same approach Uncle Philip had used whenever Grandpa suggested innovations that Philip considered too risky or progressive. That evening, as I sat alone in Grandpa's study, now my study, I opened his leather-bound journal, the one he'd given me the month before he passed. Inside, in his careful handwriting, was a letter addressed to me. "My dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, then Mr. Donovan has informed you of your inheritance. I've watched you grow from a curious child into a sharp-minded woman with the perfect combination of business acumen and compassion needed to lead Reynolds Agricultural Supply into the future. I've also watched my son and his children grow increasingly detached from the values that built this company. Their occasional interest in the business has always been tied to what they could extract from it. never what they could contribute. I fear they will not accept your leadership easily. Philip has always believed he should inherit everything, despite his lack of interest in actually understanding our business model beyond the profit margins. Ryan and Melissa have never shown genuine interest in the company's operations or its importance to the community we serve. I suspect they will attempt to undermine you, perhaps even try to force a sale of the company to one of the large agricultural conglomerates that have been circling us for years. Cortland Agribusiness has made numerous overtures, all of which I've rejected because their model would destroy the relationships we've built with family farmers, which is why I've prepared a contingency plan. The letter continued, detailing the intricate safeguards my grandfather had put in place. As I read, I felt a strange mixture of grief and gratitude. Grief that he had anticipated such betrayal from his own family, and gratitude that he had prepared me so thoroughly. The very next morning, I discovered how prescient Grandpa Sam had been. "Victoria, we need to talk," Uncle Philip announced, entering my office without knocking. Ryan and Melissa trailed behind him, attempting to look solemn, but failing to hide their excitement. "We've been discussing the future of Reynolds Agricultural Supply," Uncle Philip continued, settling into a chair across from my desk. "And we think it might be in everyone's best interest to consider acquisition offers." "Acquisition offers?" I repeated, keeping my voice neutral while my mind raced. "We haven't solicited any offers. Actually," Ryan interjected, sliding a folder across my desk, "Cortland Agribusiness has expressed strong interest. Their initial offer is quite generous." I opened the folder to find acquisition paperwork already drafted, with a purchase price. That, while substantial, significantly undervalued the company's true worth. The proposal had been dated 3 days after Grandpa's funeral. "You've been negotiating with Cortland behind my back?" I asked, looking up from the papers. "Before Grandpa was even buried?" "We're trying to be practical, Victoria," Melissa said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Everyone knows you wanted to please Grandpa by working here, but running an entire agricultural supply company? That's a completely different matter. We're looking out for your interests too," Uncle Philip added. "With your share of the sale, you could go back to school, maybe get a business degree if you really want to run something someday." I closed the folder slowly, buying time to control my rising anger. This was exactly what Grandpa had predicted, happening even sooner than he anticipated. "I understand your concerns," I said finally, my voice steady. "But I need time to review the offer properly. This isn't a decision to rush into." "Of course," Uncle Philip said, not bothering to hide his relief. "Take the weekend. We've scheduled a meeting with Cortland's representatives for Monday morning. They're very eager to move forward." After they left, I locked my office door and pulled out my phone. I had calls to make, starting with Mr. Donovan. "They've made their move even faster than your grandfather predicted," he said after I explained the situation. "We need to implement Phase 1 immediately." "I agree," I replied, pulling out the key Grandpa had given me, the one that opened the hidden safe behind his old farming awards. "I'll meet you at your office in an hour with the documents." As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Just checking if you need help understanding any of the acquisition terms." "Happy to walk you through the financials." I smiled at his condescension, typing back, "Thanks. I'll let you know if I have questions. Trying to process everything right now." He'd interpret it as the hesitant response of an overwhelmed young woman, not as the calculated calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. Little did they know that while they were already mentally spending their windfall from selling Grandpa's legacy, I was executing a plan that would leave them with nothing but an empty shell and their own shattered greed. I arrived at Mr. Donovan's law office exactly 57 minutes later, carrying a leather portfolio that contained what Grandpa Sam called the insurance policy. The receptionist, Mrs. Winters, who had worked with my grandfather for over 30 years, smiled knowingly as I entered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "He said you'd be the one to carry on properly," she whispered as she escorted me to Mr. Donovan's private office. Samuel always knew who to trust. The lawyer rose to greet me, closing the door firmly behind Mrs. Winters. "Victoria, I've started the preparations as Samuel instructed. How are you holding up?" "Better than they think," I replied, placing the portfolio on his desk. "They believe I'm some naive bookkeeper who can be intimidated into selling." Mr. Donovan chuckled, opening the portfolio to reveal the documents inside. "Your family has severely underestimated you." That was always Samuel's greatest advantage, too, being underestimated. What my relatives never bothered to learn was that my bookish nature had earned me a double major in agricultural business management and corporate law from Cornell University. The summers I spent with Grandpa weren't just sentimental visits. They were carefully structured apprenticeships. While my cousins saw me filing papers and organizing inventory, I was actually learning every aspect of the business, from negotiating supplier contracts to understanding the complex land management strategies that made Reynolds Agricultural Supply so valuable. "Samuel left specific instructions," Mr. Donovan said, pulling out another folder from his desk. "He anticipated that Philip would try to orchestrate a sale if given any authority. That's why he structured your inheritance the way he did." He spread out a diagram showing the true corporate structure of Reynolds Agricultural Supply. What appeared on paper as a single-family business was actually a carefully constructed network of separate legal entities, each one holding different key assets. The company they're trying to sell to Cortland, Reynolds Agricultural Supply, Inkier, is essentially just the operational shell, Mr. Donovan explained. The most valuable assets, the land holdings, the water rights, the equipment, and the exclusive supplier contracts, are all held by separate entities that Samuel quietly transferred to you over the past 5 years. I nodded, remembering the legal homework Grandpa had me complete on my visits. The annual gifting program. Exactly. Each birthday, Christmas, and graduation, while your cousins received checks, you received shares in these separate entities. By the time Samuel passed, you had complete ownership of Reynolds Holdings. I'll see Oak Ridge Valley Properties and Heartland Supplier Network, the companies that actually own everything of value. The brilliance of Grandpa's strategy was in its simplicity and legality. Everything had been properly documented, taxes paid, transfers recorded. Nothing could be challenged as improper or underhanded. "But they don't know this?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Philip never bothered to understand the corporate structure," Mr. Donovan confirmed. "He saw the board position as a status symbol, not a responsibility. He signed the annual reports without reading them. Your cousins are even more oblivious." What struck me most was not my family's greed. I had long ago accepted that reality, but their lack of curiosity. They never wondered why Grandpa's business thrived while similar operations failed during the agricultural crisis 5 years ago. They never questioned how he managed to secure exclusive contracts with suppliers when larger corporations couldn't. They simply assumed it was luck or some old-school relationship building. They never realized it was strategic brilliance. "What about the employees?" I asked, thinking of the loyal team who had worked alongside my grandfather for decades. "Samuel took care of them too," Mr. Donovan assured me, pulling out another document. "Key personnel have already been transferred to Heartland Operations, another entity under your control. The remaining staff have guaranteed positions and transition bonuses waiting." This was the grandfather I knew, thorough, fair, and always 3 steps ahead. While cultivating his image as a simple, old-fashioned businessman, he had built a sophisticated enterprise designed to withstand precisely this type of family betrayal. "So when Cortland purchases Reynolds Agricultural Supply," I began, They'll get the name, the flagship store building which is actually leased, not owned, and a customer list that's practically worthless without the supplier relationships. Mr. Donovan finished, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. They're corporate raiders, Victoria. They've done this to family businesses across the Midwest. Your grandfather made sure they wouldn't do it to his legacy. I pulled out my phone, checking the time. Uncle Philip texted while I was driving over. They've moved up the meeting with Cortland to tomorrow afternoon. Apparently, the buyers are eager to finalize terms. Mr. Donovan raised an eyebrow. Faster than we anticipated. Are you ready for phase 2? I've been ready for years, I replied, thinking of all those late nights studying corporate structuring with Grandpa. The weekends spent visiting remote properties that were far more valuable than they appeared. The careful introductions to key suppliers and industry contacts who knew to contact me, not Philip, when critical decisions needed to be made. My phone buzzed again, a group text from Melissa to the family. Celebrating our new beginnings tonight. Drinks at Westfield Club at 8, bringing the champagne. I showed Mr. Donovan, who shook his head slowly. They're celebrating before the deal is even finalized. Typical, I said, tucking the phone away. Ryan's probably already put a down payment on a new sports car. Will you attend their celebration? He asked, gathering the documents into a secure file. I considered the question. Part of me wanted to avoid their premature victory party. Another part, the strategic part Grandpa had nurtured, knew the value of information. Yes, I decided. I need to understand exactly what they've promised Cortland. Besides, they'll expect the overwhelmed, intimidated version of me to make an appearance. Just like Samuel taught you, Mr. Donovan nodded approvingly. Keep your competition comfortable until the moment you're ready to move. As I prepared to leave, Mr. Donovan handed me one last envelope. Samuel left this for you. He said to give it to you when the plan was in motion. Inside was a simple handwritten note and a small key. The note read, "The vault in the study floor contains everything else you'll need. They never knew it existed because they never bothered to look beyond the surface. Just like they never saw your true potential. I'm proud of you, Victoria. Grandpa, he record. I inherited Grandpa's business, but my family sold it. They had no idea. Grandpa had a backup plan. Soft piano music fades in. They toasted with champagne as the family business changed hands, completely unaware that Grandpa had entrusted me with his most valuable assets, hidden in plain sight. By Monday morning, they'd discover that they had sold nothing but an empty shell. The Westfield Club exuded old money and exclusivity, everything my grandfather had deliberately avoided despite his success. As I handed my car keys to the valet, I could already see my family through the large windows of the private dining room, glasses raised in celebration. Uncle Philip's booming laugh carried across the parking lot. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my modest navy dress and prepared to play my role. Victoria, you made it! Melissa exclaimed as I entered, her enthusiasm clearly amplified by the champagne she'd already consumed. She air-kissed near my cheek, the scent of expensive perfume overwhelming. We weren't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss a family gathering, I replied quietly, accepting a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking. The private room buzzed with energy. Uncle Philip held court at the head of the table, surrounded by not just family, but several people I recognized as his country. Club friends, wealthy locals who had always treated Grandpa with a mixture of respect and condescension. They had never understood how a simple farm supplier had managed to build more wealth than their inherited fortunes. Here she is, Uncle Philip announced, gesturing grandly in my direction. The reluctant heiress who's wisely decided to let the professionals take over. Polite laughter rippled through the group. I forced a small smile, not correcting his presumption. Victoria, Ryan approached, lowering his voice in what he probably thought was a compassionate tone. No hard feelings? About the sale, right? Grandpa meant well, but this is really for the best. You're just starting out. You don't need the burden of a failing agricultural business. Failing? I questioned, keeping my voice innocent. The quarterly reports showed 15% growth. Ryan waved dismissively. Surface numbers. The industry is changing. Consolidation is inevitable. Small operations like ours can't compete with the big players long term. It took significant self-control not to correct him. Reynolds' agricultural supply wasn't small by any measure, and its strategic positioning made it exceptionally competitive. But Ryan, with his series of failed startups and business school dropout status, had always considered himself the family's financial expert. I suppose you understand these things better than I do, I conceded, feeding his ego while mentally cataloging another example of his dismissive attitude. Throughout the evening, I moved quietly among the guests, listening more than speaking. Each conversation revealed another layer of their betrayal, not just to me, but to Grandpa's legacy and vision. Philip tells me you'll be pursuing other opportunities, Mrs. Harrington, a longtime family friend, said sympathetically as we stood near the dessert table. Such a shame your grandfather didn't see that the business needed more experienced leadership. He was a man of tradition, I replied, non-committally. Well, tradition doesn't grow businesses, she said, patting my arm condescendingly. Philip has such exciting plans for his share of the proceeds. A venture capital fund, I understand. I nodded, adding this information to my mental file. So Uncle Philip wasn't just selling out of resentment. He had specific plans for reinventing himself as a venture capitalist. How predictable. Across the room, Melissa was showing off preliminary designs for a boutique she planned to open in the city. It's always been my dream, she gushed to her friends. Curated fashion for the discerning client. The sale is basically perfect timing. I excused myself to use the restroom, using the moment of privacy to document these revelations in the Notes app on my phone. Each family member's plans for spending their windfall provided additional evidence of their motives, evidence that could prove useful if they attempted to challenge what was coming. When I returned, I noticed Uncle Philip and two men in expensive suits had moved to a corner table. I recognized one as Daniel Walsh, Cortland Agribusiness's Regional Acquisition Director. The other, based on photos I'd researched, was likely Robert Kessler, their legal counsel. Victoria, Uncle Philip called, waving me over. These gentlemen from Cortland wanted to meet you. I approached with deliberate hesitancy, maintaining my facade of uncertainty. Ms. Reynolds, Walsh extended his hand. A pleasure to meet you. Your family speaks highly of your dedication to your grandfather. His tone suggested that dedication was a quaint but impractical quality, something to be admired in theory but dismissed in practice. Mr. Walsh, I acknowledged, shaking his hand with a grip that was purposefully weaker than my usual. I understand you're interested in our company. Very much so, he confirmed. Cortland has been admiring Reynolds' agricultural supply for some time. Your grandfather built something special, but in today's market, scale is everything. Integrating. With our operations will allow his legacy to continue within a more sustainable structure. The corporate doublespeak was impressive. Integrating meant dismantling. Sustainable structure meant laying off most of the employees and extracting all possible value before discarding what remained. I see, I murmured, looking down as if processing this wisdom. And the community relationships? The family farms that depend on our flexible credit terms? Walsh and Kessler exchanged a quick glance that confirmed everything I needed to know. We'll certainly honor existing contracts, Walsh said smoothly. As they come up for renewal, we'll evaluate each relationship based on our standard metrics. Translation? They'd squeeze every small farmer until they either went bankrupt or sold to larger agricultural corporations, likely Cortland's other subsidiaries. That's reassuring, I lied, noting Uncle Philip's impatient expression. He clearly feared I might raise objections that could complicate his payday. "Victoria is still processing everything," he interjected, placing a hand on my shoulder, in a gesture that appeared supportive but felt controlling. "She's understandably emotional about changes to her grandfather's company." "Completely understandable," Walsh nodded with practiced sympathy. "Family businesses involve deep emotional connections. That's why we structure our acquisitions to honor the founding vision while adapting to market realities." More elegant deception. I'd researched Cortland thoroughly. They had a well-documented history of acquiring family businesses with promises of preserving their legacy, then systematically dismantling everything that made them special. "We're looking forward to tomorrow's meeting," Kessler added. "Just a few more details to finalize, and everyone can move forward with their exciting new chapters." Uncle Philip beamed. "We're all eager to conclude matters efficiently." I forced a weak smile. "It's certainly happening very quickly." "The best deals often do," Walsh replied with practiced charm. "When there's genuine alignment of interests, things just fall into place." The only genuine alignment was between their predatory acquisition strategy and my family's greed. But I simply nodded, excusing myself as if overwhelmed by the conversation. For the remainder of the evening, I continued my information gathering, occasionally checking my phone as messages came in from Mr. Donovan confirming various legal preparations. Each notification strengthened my resolve as I watched my family celebrate selling out everything Grandpa had built. Near the end of the evening, Uncle Philip clinked his glass for attention, his face flushed with triumph and alcohol. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced to the assembled guests. "To new beginnings and smart decisions. Tomorrow marks a turning point for our family. While my brother built a respectable local business, tomorrow we step into a larger world of opportunity." The dismissive reference to Grandpa as having built merely a respectable local business sent a surge of anger through me. Reynolds Agricultural Supply supported hundreds of family farms across 3 states and employed over 70 people who received benefits far beyond industry standards. "And a special thanks to Victoria," Uncle Philip continued, raising his glass in my direction, "for recognizing that some legacies are best honored by knowing when to let go." All eyes turned to me, expectant. I raised my still full champagne glass, maintaining my mask of quiet acquiescence. "To Grandpa," I said simply, letting them interpret my brevity as emotional constraint rather than simmering determination. As glasses clinked around the room, my phone vibrated with a message from Mrs. Winters, the longtime receptionist. "Found the files you requested in the old storage room. Everything exactly where your grandfather said it would be. All digitized and secured as instructed." Another piece falling into place. I excused myself shortly after, claiming tiredness. As I waited for the valet to bring my car, Ryan joined me outside. "You're doing the right thing, Vic," he said, using the childhood nickname I'd always disliked. "This deal is the best outcome for everyone." "I'm sure you believe that," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Look, I know it seems fast, but that's business, when opportunity knocks and all that." He rocked on his heels, already mentally spending his share. "I'm thinking of investing in a tech startup. Maybe you'd want to come work with me? Something fresh, away from all the boring agricultural stuff." The invitation, clearly an afterthought meant to assuage his conscience, was so patronizing that I almost broke character. Instead, I smiled faintly. "That's thoughtful, Ryan. Let's get through tomorrow first." My car arrived, and I left him, standing there, confident in his victory and oblivious to the fact that he was celebrating the sale of an empty shell. As I drove away from the Westfield Club, I finally allowed myself a genuine smile. They had spent the evening revealing their true intentions, confirming every suspicion Grandpa had shared with me over the years. Their betrayal wasn't just of me. It was of his vision, his employees, the community he'd supported, and ultimately themselves. They were so focused on the short-term windfall that they hadn't bothered to understand what they were selling or to whom. When I reached the farmhouse, my farmhouse now, I headed straight to Grandpa's study. Using the key from Mr. Donovan's envelope, I located and unlocked the hidden floor vault, revealing a metal container full of additional documents, hard drives, and a leather journal with detailed notes about each family member's previous attempts to extract value from the business. This wasn't just documentation for legal protection. It was a chronicle of pattern recognition. Grandpa had been logging their behaviors for years, anticipating this exact scenario. And now, those records would help me execute the final phases of his contingency plan. I settled into his leather chair, my chair now, and began reviewing everything, preparing for tomorrow's performance. By the time the Cortland executives realized what they were actually buying, my family would have already spent money they would never receive. And by the time my family understood what had happened, I would have already secured what truly mattered. Not just the assets, but the legacy and future of everything Grandpa had worked to build. The farmhouse was quiet as I spread the contents of Grandpa's vault across his desk at 5:30 the next morning. Sleep had been brief but sufficient. Years of early mornings working alongside Grandpa had conditioned me to function well on minimal rest. The first hints of dawn filtered through the study's east-facing windows as I methodically organized everything into actionable categories. The landline rang, one of the few people who still use that number. "I figured you'd be up," came the gruff voice of Hank Lawson, Grandpa's closest friend and the former regional agricultural commissioner. Now retired, he still commanded immense respect among the farming community. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, grateful for the call. "Too much to prepare." "Samuel told me this day might come," Hank said. "Told me to check in on you when it did. You holding up okay?" "I'm ready," I assured him. "Just reviewing the final pieces of his contingency plan." Hank chuckled, a sound like worn leather. "Your grandfather always said you were the only one who truly understood what he built. The others just saw dollar signs." "They still do," I said, glancing at the Cortland acquisition documents I'd photographed during the celebration. "The meeting's at 2:00 today. And you'll be ready?" "I've been ready for years," I replied, thinking of all the carefully documented lessons Grandpa had imparted. "But I could use your help with Phase 3. "Already on it," Hank confirmed. "Made the calls last night after Peter Thompson spotted those Cortland suits at the Westfield Club. Word spreading through the co-op. 27 farm owners will be in my barn at noon. The others are joining by video call." This was part of Grandpa's genius. He'd built relationships strong enough that even after his death, people rallied to protect his vision. The agricultural cooperative he'd helped establish 15 years ago represented over 200 family farms across the region. While my family saw these farmers as mere customers, Grandpa had seen them as partners and friends. "Perfect," I said. "Mr. Donovan, and I will present the new structure then." "They'll be ready," Hank assured me. "Nobody wants Cortland controlling the regional supply chain. Your grandfather protected these families for decades. They haven't forgotten." After hanging up, I returned to my preparations. The documentation from the vault included detailed dossiers on each Cortland executive involved in agricultural acquisitions. Grandpa had meticulously tracked their previous deals, documenting promises made and broken, communities impacted, and families displaced, when small farms could no longer survive Cortland's predatory pricing. Most valuable was a digital drive containing recorded conversations between Uncle Philip and Cortland representatives dating back 18 months, conversations that had occurred while Grandpa was still alive, secretly planning to sell the company against his explicit wishes. In some states, these recordings might have been legally questionable, but in our single-party consent state, they were perfectly admissible and damning. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Don't forget, meeting at 2 p.m. sharp. Wear something. Professional for once." These Cortland people are the real deal. The condescension was so typical I almost laughed. I texted back a simple thanks for the reminder while glancing down at the Cornell Law sweatshirt I was wearing. One of many aspects of my education my family had never bothered to ask about. At 7:30, the farmhouse doorbell rang. Maya Chen, the brilliant IT specialist who had maintained Reynolds' systems for the past decade, stood on the porch with a laptop bag and determination in her eyes. "You look just like him when you're planning something big," she noted as I let her in. "Same strategic expression." "I'll take that as the highest compliment," I replied, leading her to the study. "Thank you for coming so early." "Are you kidding?" "I wouldn't miss this," Maya said, setting up her equipment. "Your grandfather saved my family's farm when Cortland tried to force us out after my parents died. This isn't just business. It's personal for a lot of us." I'd arranged for Maya to handle the technological aspects of our counterplan. As Reynolds' lead systems architect, she had administrator access to all company databases, access that Uncle Philip had never bothered to revoke or even understand. More importantly, she had quietly maintained the separate systems for the other corporations Grandpa had established. "How's the migration coming?" I asked as she connected to our secure server. 97% complete, she reported, pulling up a progress dashboard. By noon, all critical data will be transferred to the new systems. I've implemented the segregation protocols Samuel specified. Reynolds Agricultural Supplies operational data remains in place, but all the valuable analytics, customer relationship histories, and proprietary supply chain algorithms have been migrated to Heartland's secured servers. This was crucial. The operational data left behind would appear complete to a standard corporate review, but without the proprietary systems and relationship histories Grandpa had developed over decades, it was just basic transaction information. Worthless for Cortland's typical acquisition strategy of data mining and customer relationship exploitation. "What about the domain controls?" I asked. "Transitioned last night," Maya confirmed. "Email continuity appears unchanged, but all new communications are being archived on our secure servers, not the legacy system Cortland will acquire." I nodded appreciatively. "And they won't detect this?" Maya smiled confidently. "Not unless they have someone better than me. The remaining shell is fully functional. It just doesn't contain anything of real value." While Maya continued her work, I received a call from Teresa Guzman, Reynolds' long-serving HR director who had become our de facto chief of staff. "Victoria, I've finished the employee transition briefings," she reported. "All key personnel have been individually informed of their new positions with Heartland. They've signed the confidentiality agreements and received their retention bonuses." "How are they taking it?" I asked, genuinely concerned about the team's morale. "Relieved," Teresa said firmly. "No one wanted to work under Cortland. Their reputation for post-acquisition layoffs is well known. Knowing they have secure positions with improved benefits has actually boosted morale significantly." This had been one of Grandpa's primary concerns, protecting the people who had helped build his company. The restructuring ensured that valuable employees would continue their work under the new entities, while those few who remained with the shell company would receive generous severance packages once Cortland inevitably downsized. "And the timing works?" I confirmed. "Perfectly," Teresa assured me. "Official transfer notices will be delivered to their Reynolds email accounts at 3:15 today, approximately 1 hour after your meeting with Cortland begins. By then, the acquisition agreement will likely be signed, making it Cortland's problem, not yours." Another piece successfully in place. I thanked Teresa and turned my attention to the financial aspects of our plan. Lindsay Morgan, our chief financial officer and one of Grandpa's most trusted advisors, arrived next. In her 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor, she had managed Reynolds' increasingly complex finances for over 20 years. Uncle Philip had tried to force her into early retirement multiple times, never succeeding and never understanding that her loyalty was to the company's mission, not to him. "The account transitions are complete," she reported, setting her briefcase on the desk. "All supplier payment protocols now route through Heartland's systems. The Reynolds accounts retain exactly the minimum operating capital required by the corporate bylaws, not a penny more." "And the outstanding receivables?" I asked. "Redirected as of midnight," Lindsay confirmed. "New customer payments now flow to Heartland accounts. The shell company will show healthy financial statements based on historical performance, but the actual cash flow has already been diverted." This was perhaps the most elegant aspect of Grandpa's plan. The company's financial statements, which Cortland had undoubtedly reviewed, showed a profitable enterprise with strong cash flow. What they couldn't see was that this cash flow had already been legally redirected to the new entities through a complex but entirely legitimate restructuring that exploited contract clauses my family had never bothered to read. "Cortland's due diligence team didn't catch this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Lindsay's smile was sharp. "Your uncle provided them with the quarterly reports he receives as a board member. Those reports show consolidated results that include all entities under the Reynolds umbrella. He never understood that the healthy profits he was so eager to sell come primarily from operations and assets that are no longer part of the shell company they're acquiring." By mid-morning, Mr. Donovan arrived with the final legal documents prepared. We gathered in the kitchen, a team of loyal experts who had recognized Grandpa's vision long before I had. "The transfer documents are complete," Mr. Donovan announced, spreading papers across the large farmhouse table. "Heartland Supplier Network has now formally acquired the exclusive distribution rights from all major agricultural suppliers. Reynolds Agricultural Supply is now legally just a retail operation with no guaranteed inventory sources." "And the real estate?" I asked. "Oak Ridge Valley Properties now officially owns all land and buildings except the flagship store, which remains on a month-to-month lease that can be terminated with 30 days' notice," Mr. Donovan confirmed. "We've also transferred all equipment leases to Reynolds Holdings LLC. The shell company now technically leases its equipment from your holding company at rates that will quickly become unsustainable once the revenue streams dry up." Maya looked up from her laptop. "What about the non-compete clauses? Won't those prevent us from operating the new entities in direct competition?" Mr. Donovan smiled. "That's the beauty of Samuel's foresight. The non-compete clauses in the standard acquisition agreement only apply to Reynolds Agricultural Supply Inc. S.A. and its officers. They don't restrict other entities or individuals not named in the agreement. Meaning I'm free to operate the new companies in direct competition," I concluded. "Precisely," Mr. Donovan nodded. "And since you're selling your shares as part of the transaction, you won't be bound by the officer restrictions either." As noon approached, we finalized our preparations. I changed into a modest but professional gray suit, one that would meet Melissa's expectations of looking professional while not drawing undue attention. The understated pearl earrings Grandpa had given me for my law school graduation completed the look of someone taking an important meeting seriously, but not someone prepared for corporate warfare. Before leaving for Hank's barn to meet with the co-op members, I took one final moment in Grandpa's study. His photograph watched over the room, not the formal portrait that hung in the company headquarters, but a candid shot of him standing in a field at sunrise, his expression reflective, but determined. "I won't let them dismantle what you built," I promised quietly. "By this evening, they'll understand exactly what they've done." With that pledge, I gathered the essential documents and headed out to rally our most important allies, the farmers, who formed the true foundation of Reynolds Agricultural Supply's success. Hank's barn had been transformed from an agricultural storage space into an impromptu meeting hall. Hand-built wooden benches arranged in a semicircle faced a projection screen rigged against hay bales. Farmers in work clothes and caps filled the space, some still with soil on their boots from morning chores. These weren't corporate executives or venture capitalists. They were the backbone of our rural economy, people who understood the value of hard work and handshake agreements. As I walked down the center aisle, conversations quieted. Many of these faces I'd known my entire life, men and women who had watched me grow up, who had taught me to drive tractors and identify crop diseases long before I learned corporate law. Their expressions ranged from curious to concerned, but not one showed the condescension I'd grown accustomed to from my family. "Victoria's here," Hank announced unnecessarily, his weathered hand gesturing me forward. On a folding table near the makeshift stage sat an old-fashioned speakerphone connected to a conference line for those who couldn't attend in person. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, my voice stronger than I'd anticipated. "As many of you have heard, my family is finalizing the sale of Reynolds Agricultural Supply to Cortland Agribusiness this afternoon." Murmurs of displeasure rippled through the audience. Cortland's reputation had preceded them. Their aggressive acquisition strategy had already claimed 3 family-owned agricultural businesses in neighboring counties, each followed by price hikes, service reductions, and broken promises. "What your grandfather feared has come to pass," said Eleanor Wilson, no relation, a third-generation wheat farmer. "Philip never understood what Samuel built was more than just a business." "No, he didn't," I acknowledged. "But my grandfather understood my family better than they understood themselves. He anticipated this scenario and prepared accordingly." I nodded to Mr. Donovan, who connected his laptop to the projector. A corporate structure diagram appeared on screen, showing the complex web of entities my grandfather had created. "Reynolds Agricultural Supply, the company being sold today, is just one component of a larger network," I explained, using a laser pointer to highlight different sections. "The most valuable assets, exclusive supplier contracts, real estate holdings, equipment, proprietary software, and intellectual property are all held by these separate entities, which my grandfather transferred to me over the past 5 years." Frank Miller, whose family had farmed the same land for over a century, leaned forward. "So what exactly is Cortland buying?" "An empty shell," I replied, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from my voice. "They're purchasing the Reynolds name, the flagship store's month-to-month lease, basic operational systems, and non-exclusive customer relationships." "What about our accounts?" asked Sarah Tran, whose family operated one of the largest rice farms in the state. "We've had credit arrangements with Reynolds for decades." "Your relationships remain secure," I assured her. "As of last night, all supplier and customer accounts have been transferred to Heartland Supplier Network, a company now under my sole control. Your credit terms, discount structures, and payment arrangements remain unchanged." Relief visibly spread through the assembled farmers. For many, the flexible credit terms Reynolds offered had been a lifeline during tough seasons. Cortland was notorious for imposing rigid payment schedules that pushed farmers toward bankruptcy, then acquiring their distressed properties at bargain prices. "What happens after the sale?" asked Gregory Patel, adjusting his cap. "Cortland will realize what they've purchased pretty quickly." "They will," I nodded. "And that's where we need your partnership." Cortland's acquisition strategy depends on customers having no alternative supplier. But you will have an alternative: Heartland Agricultural Partners. I gestured to Mr. Donovan, who advanced to the next slide showing the new company logo, similar, enough to the Reynolds design to evoke familiarity, but distinct enough to avoid legal challenges. "Beginning tomorrow morning, Heartland will commence full operations from our secondary locations, all of which are owned by Oak Ridge Valley Properties, another entity under my control. We've retained all key personnel, secured all major supplier relationships, and maintained all customer data and history." Ed Johnston, a normally quiet soybean farmer, raised his hand. "So, Reynolds, or Cortland, I guess, will essentially be competing against a company that has all the real advantages of what Reynolds used to be." "Exactly," I confirmed. "They'll have the name, but we'll have the relationships, infrastructure, And expertise. Your grandfather would be mighty proud, Hank said, nodding approvingly. But Victoria, we need to know, what do you need from us to make this work? This was the critical part of the plan, the community engagement Grandpa had valued above all else. Without these farmers' support, even our carefully constructed legal maneuvers might not succeed. 3 things, I replied. First, patience. There will be confusion in the marketplace as Cortland realizes what they've purchased. They'll likely make aggressive counteroffers and promises to win back your business. I paused, making eye contact with as many farmers as possible. Second, partnership. The new company structure includes a formal advisory board consisting of co-op representatives. You'll have a direct voice in major decisions affecting the agricultural community, something Cortland would never offer. Approving nods circulated through the barn. This kind of genuine input was rare in an industry increasingly dominated by corporate conglomerates. And third, prompted Eleanor. Spread the word, I said simply. Let other farmers know they have a choice, that they don't have to accept Cortland's terms or watch another local business be dismantled for corporate profit. The discussion continued for another hour as we addressed specific concerns and finalized transition plans. By the time we concluded, a new sense of purpose had replaced the initial anxiety. These weren't just customers. They were partners in preserving something essential to our community's future. As the meeting dispersed, Hank approached with Frank Miller and Eleanor Wilson. We've been talking, Hank said, gesturing to the small group of senior farmers. We'd like to make a statement of our own today. What kind of statement? I asked, intrigued. Frank smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. We thought we might pay a visit to Reynolds' headquarters. Around, say, 2:30? Just when your family's meeting with Cortland should be wrapping up. Eleanor nodded. Nothing disruptive, just a group of concerned customers inquiring about the sudden change in ownership. Maybe asking some pointed questions about future credit terms, delivery schedules, and community commitments. I couldn't help but smile at the elegant simplicity of their proposal. That would certainly make an impression on Cortland's executives. We thought so too, Hank agreed with a wink. They should understand exactly what they're walking into. After leaving the barn meeting, I had just enough time to return to the farmhouse and prepare for the upcoming confrontation. Mr. Donovan accompanied me, reviewing final details for the afternoon's performance. Remember, he counseled as we pulled into the driveway, the key is to maintain your composure no matter what happens. Your family in Cortland will likely become quite agitated when they realize the situation. I've been practicing my surprised face, I assured him wryly. I want to appear appropriately shocked when Uncle Philip realizes what he's actually sold. Inside, I changed from my modest suit into an even more deliberately understated outfit, a simple blue blouse and gray skirt that matched my family's perception of me as unsophisticated in business matters. I removed my pearl earrings in favor of small silver studs that had belonged to my grandmother. The transformation was subtle but effective, presenting exactly the image of the overwhelmed granddaughter they expected to see. My phone buzzed with messages from both Ryan and Melissa, each reminding me not to be late and to let Uncle Philip handle the talking. I responded with appropriately meek acknowledgments, further reinforcing their misperceptions. At 1:15, I received a call from Maya. Final systems transition complete, she reported. All critical data has been migrated, and the automated email notifications are scheduled for 3:15. Once those deploy, everyone will understand exactly which company they're actually working for. Perfect timing, I confirmed. Have you received any inquiries from Cortland's technical team? Just routine access requests, Maya replied. They're planning a systems review next week. They'll have full access to exactly what we want them to see, and nothing more. As I prepared to leave, Teresa called with one final update. The new business cards and letterhead have been delivered to all secondary locations. Signage teams are standing by to rebrand as soon as you give the word. We can be fully operational as Heartland by opening time tomorrow. The pieces were all in place. I gathered the documents I would need for the meeting, deliberately bringing only the standard shareholder materials my family would expect me to have, nothing that would prematurely reveal our countermoves. Mr. Donovan watched me with an appraising eye as I collected my modest portfolio. "You truly are Samuel's granddaughter," he observed. "I've never seen anyone so composed before walking into this kind of confrontation." "Grandpa taught me that business isn't about emotional outbursts or dramatic gestures," I replied, checking my appearance one last time in the hallway mirror. "It's about strategy, patience, and recognizing that sometimes the strongest position is the one your opponent doesn't see coming." At 1:30, I climbed into my practical sedan, not the luxury vehicle my cousin Ryan drove or the status symbol SUV Melissa preferred. This, too, was part of the image I had cultivated, the unassuming appearance that had allowed my family to underestimate me for so long. "Ready for this?" Mr. Donovan asked as we pulled away from the farmhouse. I thought about Grandpa, about his vision for the company, about the community that depended on the business he'd built. I thought about the years of dismissive comments from my family, their assumption that my dedication to learning the business was merely sentimentality rather than genuine commitment. "I've been ready for years," I replied, a sense of calm determination settling over me. They just never bothered to notice. As we drove toward Reynolds headquarters, my phone lit up with a message from Uncle Philip. "Meeting room is prepared." Cortland team arrived early, very eager to finalize terms. "Try not to say anything that might complicate matters." I smiled at his continuing condescension, typing back a deliberately timid response. "On my way." "Just feeling a little overwhelmed by everything." His reply came quickly, perfectly normal. "Just follow my lead. This is the best outcome for everyone." "For everyone except Cortland and my family," I murmured to myself as we pulled into the headquarters parking lot. The Cortland executives' luxury cars were already there, along with Uncle Philip's Mercedes and the sports car Ryan had recently leased in anticipation of his windfall. I took a deep breath, centering myself for the performance ahead. In less than 2 hours, everything would change. The quiet, overlooked granddaughter was about to reveal herself as the strategic heir Grandpa had always intended me to be. And my family would finally understand the true cost of underestimation. The Reynolds Agricultural Supply Headquarters. Lobby featured a wall of photographs chronicling the company's 60-year history. As I entered with Mr. Donovan at my side, I paused briefly before the centerpiece image, Grandpa at 28, standing proudly in front of his first storefront, a weather-beaten building barely large enough to house the essential farming supplies he'd started with. "Your grandfather kept that photo as a reminder," the receptionist, Nancy, said warmly. "He said success wasn't about how big you became, but about never forgetting why you started." I nodded, grateful for her words as she buzzed us through to the executive floor. In the elevator, Mr. Donovan checked his watch. "It's 1:48. The system transitions are complete, correct?" "Fully operational," I confirmed quietly. Heartland's systems went live at noon. The email notifications are set for 3:15. The elevator doors opened to reveal Melissa waiting, her expression a mixture of impatience and condescension. She wore an expensive designer suit that seemed excessive for a small-town business meeting, clearly dressed to impress the Cortland executives. "Finally," she said, checking her watch. "You're cutting it close. Everyone's already in the boardroom." She lowered her voice, scanning my modest outfit with poorly concealed disapproval. "Couldn't you have worn something more impressive? These Cortland people are serious business people." "This seemed appropriate," I replied mildly, allowing a hint of nervousness to show through. I didn't want to appear pretentious. Melissa sighed dramatically. Well, it's too late now. Just try to look confident, even if you don't feel it. And remember, let Uncle Philip handle the negotiations. Of course, I agreed, following her down the hallway. Mr. Donovan walked beside me, his briefcase containing the only documentation that mattered, the proof that the transactions about to occur would be binding despite their fundamental misunderstandings. The Reynolds boardroom featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking fertile farmland that stretched to the horizon. Grandpa had designed it this way deliberately, ensuring that even the most corporate discussions would occur with a clear view of the agricultural foundation that supported everything. Conversation stopped as we entered. Uncle Philip stood at the head of the table, flanked by the Cortland executives I'd met at the celebration dinner. Ryan sat nearby, already looking bored with the proceedings despite their life-changing implications. 2 Cortland attorneys and their financial officer occupied the other side of the table, laptops open and documents spread before them. "Victoria, there you are," Uncle Philip said with forced joviality. "We were just discussing the transition timeline with our new partners." I noted his choice of words, "our new partners," as if he would maintain some connection to the business after the sale. Cortland's CEO, Walsh, offered no correction to this fantasy. "Mr. Donovan," Walsh acknowledged with professional courtesy, "I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." "Just ensuring all parties have proper legal representation," Mr. Donovan replied pleasantly. "Standard practice for transactions of this magnitude." Uncle Philip's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd clearly hoped to exclude my attorney from these final discussions. "Victoria, you remember Daniel Walsh and Robert Kessler from Cortland," Uncle Philip continued smoothly. "And this is Patricia Vega, their CFO, and Michael Burke, their transition manager." I greeted each with a firm handshake, but deliberately subdued demeanor. Vega assessed me with sharp eyes, her expression betraying mild curiosity about my role. Burke barely looked up from his laptop, already planning the dismantling of what he believed he was acquiring. "Shall we get started?" Uncle Philip suggested, gesturing to the chairs. "We've prepared the final transfer documents as discussed, with the adjustments your legal team requested." As everyone settled around the table, I took the seat furthest from the action, positioning myself as an observer rather than a decision-maker. Mr. Donovan sat beside me, quietly opening his briefcase. "Before we proceed," Walsh began, "I'd like to clarify the immediate transition plans. As discussed with Philip, we intend to begin integration immediately, with Cortland management teams arriving tomorrow to commence operational assessment." The speed was predictable. Cortland's standard acquisition playbook involved rapid takeover to prevent any assets or key personnel from escaping their grasp. What Walsh didn't know was that this urgency would only accelerate his discovery of what they'd actually purchased. "That timeline works for us," Uncle Philip confirmed without consulting anyone else. "Reynolds' staff has been informed that ownership changes are coming, though specific details have been withheld pending today's finalization." Another convenient fiction. The staff had indeed been informed, but not in the way Uncle Philip believed. Teresa's carefully worded internal memo had prepared them for significant organizational changes, without specifying the nature of those changes. "Excellent," Walsh nodded. "Our priority is ensuring continuity for your agricultural customers while we implement Cortland's enhanced efficiency protocols." The euphemism for their cost-cutting and price-hiking strategies made me suppress a smile. By this time tomorrow, those agricultural customers would already be receiving deliveries from Heartland trucks. The meeting proceeded with methodical corporate efficiency. Presentations outlined Cortland's integration strategy, transition timelines, and financial projections. I remained quiet, occasionally taking notes or nodding thoughtfully, playing the role of the intimidated granddaughter overwhelmed by corporate proceedings. During a discussion of supplier contracts, I noticed Vega frowning slightly at her laptop screen. "These exclusive supply arrangements," she said, looking up at Uncle Philip. They transfer with the company, correct? Of course, Uncle Philip replied without hesitation. All operational agreements are included in the acquisition. Mr. Donovan and I exchanged the briefest glance. Uncle Philip was making promises he couldn't keep, promises about assets he didn't control. Walsh turned to me directly for the first time. Victoria, as someone who worked closely with your grandfather, you must have insight into these supplier relationships. Any concerns about transition issues we should address? The question presented a delicate moment. My first opportunity to plant seeds of doubt without revealing our full strategy. Grandpa always emphasized the personal nature of our supplier partnerships, I replied carefully. Many were built on decades of mutual trust. I'm sure they'll be interested to understand Cortland's approach to these relationships. Walsh nodded as if receiving valuable but ultimately inconsequential advice. We value those relationships and intend to maintain them, perhaps with more formalized structures. The discussion returned to financial details, with Ryan occasionally interjecting questions about the payment schedule. His eagerness to receive his share was barely concealed, his attention focused entirely on when funds would be disbursed rather than what was actually being sold. At 2:30, as the meeting progressed to reviewing the final sales agreement, my phone vibrated silently in my pocket. A text from Hank. Delegation assembled in the parking lot. 28 farmers and counting. Ready when you are. I suppressed a smile, imagining the scene unfolding outside. Pickup trucks and farm vehicles filling the visitor parking, weathered farmers in work clothes preparing to make their presence known. The timing would be perfect. Now, regarding Section 7, 3 of the agreement, Kessler Cortland's attorney was saying, we've adjusted the non-compete language as requested. The clause now specifically prevents former Reynolds executives from establishing competing agricultural supply businesses within the region for a period of 5 years. That seems reasonable, Uncle Philip agreed without consulting me, despite my status as the primary shareholder. Victoria won't be pursuing anything in this industry anyway. I allowed a flicker of discomfort to cross my face, as if bothered by having my future decided but too intimidated to object. Melissa, noticing this, gave me a warning look from across the table. The Cortland team seemed satisfied with Uncle Philip's presumption to speak for me. Only Vega seemed to register something off, her shrewd eyes briefly meeting mine with a questioning glance before returning to her documents. As the meeting approached, the 3-hour mark, the final documents were arranged for signatures. My family's excitement was palpable. Uncle Philip straightening his tie repeatedly, Ryan checking his watch as if calculating how quickly he could reach the luxury car dealership, Melissa already texting friends about celebration plans. We'll need signatures from all current shareholders, Kessler explained, passing document folders around the table. Philip, as board chairman, Ryan and Melissa as minority shareholders, and of course, Victoria as majority shareholder. The moment had arrived. I accepted my folder with appropriate solemnity, watching as my family eagerly began signing their copies without even a cursory review of the final terms. Take your time, Victoria, Mr. Donovan advised loudly enough for everyone to hear. These are significant documents deserving careful consideration. Uncle Philip barely concealed his annoyance. Everything's in order, Victoria. The same terms we discussed yesterday. I nodded, opening the folder and slowly reviewing the first page with deliberate care. The clock on the wall read 2:55. In 20 minutes, the automated emails would deploy, revealing to every employee, supplier, and customer the true nature of today's transactions. Victoria, Uncle Philip prompted, his patience visibly thinning. We shouldn't keep our partners waiting. I just want to be thorough, I replied, turning to the next page with studied concentration. Grandpa always said never to sign anything you haven't read completely. Ryan sighed dramatically. It's a standard acquisition agreement, Vic. Nothing complicated. If only he knew how wrong he was. Nothing about this agreement was standard, and everything was complicated, specifically because of what the documents didn't include. At precisely 3 Gao, Nancy's voice came through the intercom. "Excuse me, Mr. Reynolds, but there's a large group of agricultural customers in the lobby asking to speak with management about the ownership change. They seem quite insistent." Uncle Philip frowned, pressing the intercom button. "Tell them we're in an important meeting and will issue a formal statement tomorrow." "I tried, sir," Nancy replied, a hint of satisfaction in her voice that only I would recognize. "They've said they're not leaving until they speak with someone in authority about the future of their accounts." Walsh shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should address their concerns. Customer retention is critical during ownership transitions." "I'll handle it after we conclude here," Uncle Philip said dismissively. "Just some farmers worried about changes to their credit terms. Nothing that can't wait." I watched Walsh and Vega exchange glances. They had undoubtedly promised their board a smooth acquisition with minimal customer disruption. A lobby full of concerned farmers was not part of their projected scenario. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. As Hank had promised, the farmers were making sure Cortland understood exactly what they were walking into. A community that valued relationships over corporate efficiency, loyalty over profit margins, and most importantly, a community that wouldn't simply accept new owners without questioning their intentions. "I've completed my review," I announced, picking up the pen with an air of finality. The Cortland executives leaned forward slightly, eager to conclude the transaction that they believed would secure their expansion into our agricultural region. Little did they know that their signatures would purchase nothing but an empty shell, while the true heart of Reynolds Agricultural Supply was already beating under a new name. I signed the document with a steady hand, the culmination of years of preparation hidden behind a facade of reluctant compliance. The moment my pen lifted from the final page, a sense of quiet satisfaction settled over me. Not triumph, but the calm certainty that comes from executing a perfectly orchestrated plan. "Excellent," Walsh said, collecting the signed documents with evident relief. "On behalf of Cortland Agribusiness, we're pleased to welcome Reynolds Agricultural Supply into our family of companies." Uncle Philip beamed, reaching across to shake Walsh's hand enthusiastically. "I know my brother's company will thrive under your progressive management." The carefully chosen phrase, "my brother's company," rather than "our family business," revealed once again how he had always viewed Reynolds Agricultural Supply, not as a legacy to protect, but as an asset to leverage. "Now, regarding those farmers in the lobby," Walsh continued, checking his watch, "perhaps we should address them together. A unified front would demonstrate continuity during the transition." Before Uncle Philip could respond, the boardroom door opened. Nancy appeared with an apologetic expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent matter requiring immediate attention." "We're just concluding." "Here," Uncle Philip said dismissively. "Whatever it is can wait." "Actually, sir," Nancy continued, her gaze shifting briefly to me, "it's regarding the company email system. There seems to have been an automated message deployed to all employees, suppliers, and customers. Ms. Vega's assistant just brought it to my attention." Vega immediately opened her laptop, fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. "I'm not seeing anything." She stopped abruptly, her expression changing. "Wait, it just came through." The digital clock on the wall read 3:15 exactly. Maya's automated notifications had deployed with perfect timing. "What message?" Uncle Philip demanded, his celebratory mood darkening. "I authorized no communications about the sale until after our formal announcement." Vega turned her laptop so Walsh could see the screen. His confident expression faltered as he scanned the content. "What is this? Some kind of restructuring notification?" Ryan, suddenly alert, pulled out his phone. "I've got it too. It's addressed to all Reynolds associates and business partners." The message that had just been simultaneously delivered to hundreds of recipients was elegantly simple. Important notice: corporate restructuring and transition. Dear valued partner, effective immediately, all operations previously conducted under Reynolds Agricultural Supply are transitioning to Heartland Agricultural Partners, a company founded on the same principles of service, integrity, and community support that have guided us for 60 years. All existing accounts, credit arrangements, supplier contracts, and business relationships will continue uninterrupted through Heartland, with the same team members you've always trusted serving you from our network of locations throughout the region. Only our name is changing. Our commitment to you remains stronger than ever. For any questions, please contact your usual representative, who will now be serving you as part of the Heartland team. Sincerely, Victoria Reynolds, President and CEO, Heartland Agricultural Partners. The boardroom fell silent as the implications of the message sank in. Uncle Philip's face flushed crimson as he turned to me, comprehension and fury dawning simultaneously. "What have you done?" he demanded. "This is completely unauthorized. We just signed the sale agreement." I maintained my composure, the meek facade falling away. "I've done exactly what Grandpa prepared me to do. I've preserved the true value of his life's work." Walsh's expression hardened as he turned to his attorney. "Kessler, what's happening here? Is this some kind of last-minute negotiation tactic?" Mr. Donovan chose this moment to intervene, his calm professional tone cutting through the tension. "Not a tactic, Mr. Walsh. A reality you should have discovered during due diligence. What you've purchased today is Reynolds Agricultural Supply, Inc., a corporate entity that, while legitimate, no longer holds the assets you believed you were acquiring." "That's absurd," Uncle Philip sputtered. "The company is the company." "Actually," I corrected him, opening my own folder and sliding the documents across the table, "the company is a carefully structured network of entities. Reynolds Agricultural Supply, Inc. is merely the operational shell. The real assets, the land, buildings, supplier contracts, equipment, intellectual property, and customer data, are all held by separate companies that weren't included in today's transaction." Melissa stared at me with disbelief. "That's not possible. We're on the board." "Of Reynolds Agricultural Supply, Inc. and your crew," Mr. Donovan clarified. "You never served on the boards of Reynolds Holdings LLC, Oak Ridge Valley Properties, or Heartland Supplier Network, the entities that actually own everything of value. Those companies have been under Victoria's sole control for years." Ryan lunged for the documents, scanning them with growing horror. "These transfers are dated. These go back 5 years. How did we not know about this?" "Because you never read the reports," I said simply. "You signed off on annual financial statements showing payments to affiliated entities without ever questioning what those entities were or who controlled them. Grandpa transferred the assets gradually, year by year, while you collected your board stipends and focused on the profits without understanding their source." The Cortland executives were rapidly shifting from confusion to anger as they realized the nature of what they'd purchased. Walsh turned to Vega. "Pull up the asset list from the due diligence report." She was already furiously typing. Our team verified the consolidated financial statements showed substantial assets and property holdings. Consolidated statements, I emphasized, which included all affiliated entities under the Reynolds umbrella. But the purchase agreement you just signed specifically covers only Reynolds Agricultural Supply, Inc., not the affiliated companies that own the actual assets. Kessler snatched the acquisition agreement, flipping through pages with growing agitation. "This is fraud. You deliberately misrepresented the company structure." "Not at all," Mr. Donovan replied calmly. "Every document provided was factually accurate. The consolidated statements clearly labeled affiliated entities as separate legal structures. Your team never requested detailed information on those specific entities or their ownership. That would have been basic due diligence for an acquisition of this magnitude." The perfect legal truth hung in the air. Cortland had failed to perform. Proper due diligence, assuming they were dealing with an unsophisticated family business instead of a carefully structured corporate network. Uncle Philip turned on me, his voice trembling with rage. You manipulated the situation. You let us believe we were selling the entire company. I never once claimed you had the authority to sell what you didn't own, I replied evenly. You made assumptions based on your own ignorance of the business structure, ignorance that stemmed from never bothering to truly understand what Grandpa built. Walsh's face had turned an alarming shade of red. The supplier contracts, the customer base, the proprietary inventory system, where are they? Transferred to Heartland as of midnight, I confirmed. All legally executed with proper documentation. The shell you purchased retains non-exclusive rights to the customer list, but the relationships themselves have already been secured by our new entity. Vega was now on her phone, frantically giving instructions to someone on the other end. After a moment, she looked up with barely controlled fury. Our team just attempted to access the Reynolds supplier database. The system shows all major supplier contracts were formally transferred to Heartland Supplier Network 3 weeks ago, with supplier confirmations on file. That's impossible, Uncle Philip insisted. I would have been notified of such transfers, as board chairman. The board of Reynolds Agricultural Supply Inc. has no authority over transactions conducted by separate legal entities, Mr. Donovan explained patiently, as if to a child. Those companies operate under different governance structures clearly documented in corporate filings that have been publicly available for years. Ryan slumped in his chair, the reality finally hitting him. So, what exactly did we sell them? A name, I said simply. A building lease that expires in 30 days. An inventory management system without the proprietary algorithms that make it valuable. And customer relationships that, as of 3:15 today, have been officially transferred to Heartland. The silence that followed was broken by the intercom once again. Excuse me, Nancy's voice came through, poorly concealing satisfaction. But the group of farmers in the lobby is growing. There are now over 40 agricultural customers asking specifically to speak with Ms. Reynolds about transferring their accounts to Heartland. Walsh slammed his hand on the table. This is corporate sabotage. We'll challenge these transfers in court immediately. You're welcome to try, Mr. Donovan replied unperturbed. But I should inform you that all transfers were executed according to contractual terms that Mr. Reynolds here approved as board chairman. The documents bear his signature, though I doubt he recalls signing them, given his habit of approving paperwork without reading it. Uncle Philip paled, suddenly remembering the stacks of quarterly compliance documents he'd mindlessly signed over the years. Additionally, I added, sliding another folder toward Walsh, you might want to review these before pursuing legal action. Inside were printouts of email exchanges between Uncle Philip and Cortland representatives dating back 18 months, conversations explicitly discussing selling the company while my grandfather was still alive, against his documented wishes. In our single-party consent state, these legally obtained communications would deeply complicate any litigation Cortland might pursue. How did you get these? Uncle Philip whispered, recognizing his own words on the page. Grandpa may have appeared to be an old-fashioned businessman, I replied, but he understood modern technology well enough to recognize threats to his legacy, both external and internal. The boardroom door opened again, this time revealing Teresa, now wearing a Heartland name badge. Victoria, the transition team is assembled in Conference Room B. Maya has confirmed all systems are fully operational under the new structure, and Lindsay has the financial transfer protocols ready for your final approval. Thank you, Teresa, I acknowledged, standing up. Please inform our agricultural partners in the lobby that I'll speak with them shortly. You can't just walk away from this table, Walsh exploded, his corporate composure finally shattering. We've just paid $37 million for what appears to be an empty shell. A transaction my family eagerly executed, I noted calmly. Perhaps you should discuss your concerns with your new business partners. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with notifications. Maya had timed the final stage perfectly. Heartland Agricultural Partners' new website had just gone live, featuring a message about continuing the Reynolds legacy under new management, along with a familiar team of faces that the agricultural community had trusted for decades. "You planned this all along," Melissa accused, her voice quavering between anger and disbelief. "While we were celebrating last night, you were executing this coup." "No," I corrected her. "Grandpa planned this years ago. He knew exactly what would happen when he passed away. He understood that you valued the wealth he created, but not the principles that created it." I gathered my belongings, nodding to Mr. Donovan that I was ready to depart. As we moved toward the door, Ryan suddenly looked up from his phone with horror. "The money," he said hoarsely. "The transfer to our accounts. It hasn't come through." "That's because there is no money," Uncle Philip realized, his voice hollow. "We sold nothing of value." Walsh turned to his attorney with barely controlled fury. "Kessler, find me a way out of this agreement. Now." The attorney was already shaking his head. "The transaction is complete. The documents are filed. We own Reynolds Agricultural Supply, Inc. Exactly what the agreement specified." "Then what do we actually own?" Vega demanded. I paused at the doorway, turning back to face the stunned group. "A very expensive lesson in due diligence, Ms. Vega. Something my grandfather taught me was priceless." As Mr. Donovan and I stepped into the hallway, the sound of raised voices erupted behind us. The elegant corporate facade had cracked, revealing the raw fury and panic beneath. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Mr. Donovan asked quietly as we walked toward Conference Room B, where my real team awaited. "They won't accept this defeat easily." "I've been preparing for this moment my entire adult life," I replied, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Everything that matters, the people, the relationships, the true value of what Grandpa built, is already secured." We reached the conference room door, beyond which I could see the core team that had helped execute our countermove. Maya, Teresa, Lindsay, and others who had recognized the true value of Reynolds Agricultural Supply went far beyond its balance sheet. "Besides," I added with the quiet confidence Grandpa had nurtured in me, "they can't fight what they don't understand." And they never bothered to understand any of it. I opened the door to what was effectively our war room, the command center from which we would complete the transition from Reynolds to Heartland, preserving everything that mattered while discarding the empty shell my family had so eagerly sold. Conference Room B hummed with focused energy as I entered. Unlike the mahogany and leather of the formal boardroom, this space had always been Grandpa's true operational center, practical, functional, and designed for actual work rather than appearances. The walls were covered with maps showing our distribution network, supplier locations, and customer concentrations across the region. "They know," I announced simply to the assembled team. Maya looked up from her laptop with a satisfied smile. "System transition complete. All users have been migrated to Heartland's platforms. Reynolds Agricultural Supply's remaining digital infrastructure is officially an empty vessel." "Customer reaction?" I asked, moving to the center of the room where a large digital dashboard displayed real-time metrics. Teresa consulted her tablet. "Overwhelmingly positive. 93 incoming calls in the first 15 minutes after the notification went out. The response script is working beautifully. Customers understand this is a continuation of service, not a disruption." "The farmers in the lobby?" I turned to Lindsay, who had been coordinating with Hank. "Growing by the minute," she confirmed. "Hank says they're making quite the impression. Several have specifically asked to cancel their Reynolds accounts and establish new ones with Heartland immediately." A ripple of satisfaction moved through the room. This wasn't just a corporate maneuver. It was community solidarity, the agricultural network that Grandpa had nurtured for decades, rallying to protect their mutual interests against an outside corporate raider. Financial transfers? I asked. All critical accounts have been redirected, Lindsay confirmed. The shell company retains exactly the minimum operating capital required by the corporate bylaws, which will be depleted within approximately 3 weeks given their fixed expenses and now non-existent revenue stream. Mr. Donovan, who had been observing with quiet approval, added, "Perfect timing. Just enough runway for them to realize the severity of their situation without any claim that we left the entity instantly insolvent." I nodded, appreciating once again the meticulous planning that had gone into every aspect of this transition. "And our first deliveries under the Heartland name?" "Scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow," Teresa replied. "Routes are optimized, drivers are briefed, and new signage is ready for all vehicles and facilities. The only location not rebranded will be the flagship store, which remains Reynolds Agricultural Supply as per the sale agreement." A knock at the door interrupted our briefing. Nancy peered in, her expression both apologetic and amused. "Victoria, the situation in the main lobby is getting rather theatrical." Mr. Walsh attempted to address the farmers, but they're insisting on speaking with you directly. "I'll be right there," I assured her. Turning back to the team, I continued, "This is just the beginning. Cortland won't accept defeat easily, and my family certainly won't go quietly once they realize what's happened. Let them come," Maya said with quiet confidence. "Every system, contract, and asset transfer has been triple-checked for legal compliance. There's nothing they can attack that hasn't been thoroughly secured." With a final nod to the team, I left the war room and made my way to the main lobby, now crowded with farmers in work clothes, a stark visual contrast to the corporate suits of the Cortland team, who stood clustered near the reception desk looking increasingly uncomfortable. Hank spotted me first, a broad smile breaking across his weathered face. There she is, Victoria Reynolds, carrying on her grandfather's legacy the right way. The assembled farmers broke into applause, many nodding with approval or raising their caps in respect. These weren't just customers. They were the lifeblood of our rural economy, families who had worked their land for generations and depended on reliable agricultural partners who understood their unique challenges. Walsh attempted to intercept me, his corporate composure visibly strained. "Ms. Reynolds, this public spectacle is highly unprofessional. We should continue our discussion privately." "There's nothing private about what's happening here, Mr. Walsh," I replied, loud enough for the farmers to hear. "Reynolds Agricultural Supply has always operated with transparency and community input. That won't change under its new ownership, yours or mine." I turned to address the gathered farmers directly, feeling a calm confidence that would have made Grandpa proud. "As many of you have already heard, we've established Heartland Agricultural Partners to continue the work my grandfather began 60 years ago. Same team, same values, same commitment to supporting family farms, just a different name." Ed Johnston stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of 3 generations of farming experience. "We want you to know we stand with you, Victoria. Samuel was more than a supplier. He was a partner who understood that our success was his success. And that remains our philosophy," I assured him. "The transition to Heartland will be seamless for all of you. Your accounts, credit terms, delivery schedules, everything remains unchanged." I could see the Cortland executives exchanging glances, clearly calculating the rapid erosion of the customer base they thought they had purchased. Walsh stepped forward again, attempting to salvage something from the debacle. "Reynolds Agricultural Supply, now under Cortland management, will be offering competitive incentives for customers who maintain their existing accounts," he announced, his corporate smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We're prepared to offer substantial first-year discounts and extended payment terms." Frank Miller, never one to mince words, responded with a snort. Heard that before from Cortland when you bought Central Valley Supply last year? 3 months later, prices went up 30% and small farmers got pushed to the back of the delivery schedule. We're not falling for corporate promises again. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Cortland's reputation had preceded them. Their pattern of acquisition, consolidation, and exploitation was well known throughout the agricultural community. As the farmers continued expressing their support for the transition to Heartland, I noticed Uncle Philip, Ryan, and Melissa watching from the second-floor balcony, their expressions a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning comprehension. The reality was finally setting in. They hadn't just lost a windfall. They had lost their connection to a legacy they had never valued until it was gone. After addressing the farmers' immediate questions and ensuring Teresa had a team in place to help with any account transition paperwork, I made my way back to my office, Grandpa's old office, which I had never presumed to occupy until this moment. The familiar space, with its wall of agricultural reference books and the faint scent of the pipe Grandpa had reluctantly given up years ago, felt like a sanctuary amid the day's controlled chaos. I had barely settled behind the desk when Uncle Philip burst in without knocking, his face flushed with anger. Ryan and Melissa followed, looking equally agitated. "You've destroyed this family," Uncle Philip declared, hands shaking with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I met his gaze steadily. "I've preserved Grandpa's true legacy, not just the business, but the principles it was built on." "Don't give me that sanctimonious garbage," he spat. "You've stolen what rightfully belonged to all of us." "Nothing was stolen," I corrected him calmly. "Every transfer was legally executed and properly documented. Documentation you signed off on as board chairman without bothering to read." Ryan stepped forward, his usual smug confidence replaced by desperate calculation. "We can work something out, Victoria. There must be a way to recover from this. Maybe a new agreement that includes all of us in this Heartland company." The transparency of his pivot was almost amusing, from dismissing me as an incompetent bookkeeper to suddenly acknowledging my authority in the span of a few hours. "There's nothing to work out," I replied. "Heartland's ownership structure is established and doesn't include family members who demonstrated no interest in the actual business until they realized its monetary value." Melissa, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "What about the money? The $37 million Cortland paid? Where is it?" "In the Reynolds Agricultural Supply accounts," I explained patiently, "which you three now own along with Cortland. Congratulations on your new partnership with one of the most notoriously aggressive agricultural conglomerates in the industry." The implications slowly dawned on them. They had sold a hollow company to Cortland, and now they would face Cortland's wrath as co-owners of a worthless shell. The acquisition payment they had expected to divide among themselves would instead go toward operating a company stripped of its valuable assets and customer base. "This isn't over," Uncle Philip threatened, his voice low. "We'll challenge these transfers. We'll expose what you've done." "Feel free to try," I replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "This contains copies of every transfer document, board, resolution, and corporate filing establishing the separate entities and their ownership. Each one bears your signature as board chairman, authorizing the very structure you're now objecting to." He snatched the folder, flipping through with growing dismay as he recognized his own signature on page after page, documents he had signed without reading during routine board meetings over the years. "You manipulated the process," he accused, though his voice had lost some of its conviction. "No, I simply understood it better than you did," I corrected. "Grandpa taught me everything about the business, not just the profits and losses, but the legal structure, the strategic relationships, the operational details. All the things you considered beneath your attention." Ryan's phone buzzed with a notification. His expression fell further as he read the screen. "The Westville Country Club just canceled my membership application." Apparently, there are concerns about recent business developments. The social consequences were already beginning, the community grapevine working with its usual efficiency to spread word of what had happened. In a small agricultural community where reputation and relationships were paramount, my family would soon discover the true cost of their attempted betrayal. "What do you expect us to do now?" Melissa demanded, her carefully cultivated sophistication crumbling under the weight of reality. "That's entirely up to you," I replied evenly. "You've gotten exactly what you wanted, a clean break from Grandpa's old-fashioned business. You're now part owners of a Cortland subsidiary with no employees, no assets, and no customers. I suggest you start attending their board meetings with more attention than you showed at ours." Uncle Philip looked as though he might say more, but Mr. Donovan chose that moment to enter the office, his timing impeccable as always. "Victoria, the transition team needs your input on tomorrow's supplier communications," he announced, then acknowledged my family with a professional nod. "I see you're busy with personal matters. Perhaps we should reschedule the operational briefing." "No need," I replied, standing to indicate our family discussion was concluded. My relatives were just leaving to consult with their new business partners at Cortland. The dismissal was clear. After a moment of tense silence, Uncle Philip turned and stormed out, followed by Ryan. Melissa lingered briefly at the door. "You won't get away with this," she said, but the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I already have," I replied simply. Not because I was cleverer, but because I actually cared about what Grandpa built, not just what it was worth. After they left, Mr. Donovan closed the door and turned to me with a hint of admiration. "Your grandfather would have been enormously proud of how you handled that." "There's still much to do," I said, glancing at my watch. "Cortland will be mobilizing their legal team as we speak, and my family will be looking for any vulnerability they can exploit." "Let them try," Mr. Donovan replied confidently. "Everything has been executed by the book. Their own negligence and greed created this situation, not your actions." As evening fell, I remained in the office, finalizing transition details and addressing the countless questions that arose from such a significant organizational change. Outside my window, I could see Cortland executives in the parking lot, engaged in heated phone conversations, undoubtedly reporting to their corporate headquarters the extent of their disastrous acquisition. My phone buzzed with a text from Hank. Word spreading like wildfire. Every farmer in 3 counties knows Heartland is the real Reynolds now. You've done your grandfather proud today. For the first time since the morning's tensions began, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. This wasn't just about outsmarting Cortland or outmaneuvering my family. It was about preserving something genuinely valuable, a business built on relationships, community support, and the understanding that true success meant helping others succeed alongside you. The principles Grandpa had instilled in me hadn't just saved his legacy. They had revealed the stark contrast between those who saw business as merely a vehicle for personal enrichment and those who understood its potential as a force for community good. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal threats, attempted counterattacks, the complex logistics of fully establishing Heartland's market presence. But tonight, in the quiet of Grandpa's office surrounded by the books and maps that had guided his 60-year journey, I finally felt the weight of uncertainty lift from my shoulders. The path forward was clear, the team was committed, and most importantly, the values that had built Reynolds Agricultural Supply would continue under the Heartland name. My family and Cortland had spent their final night of ignorance celebrating a hollow victory. Tomorrow, they would wake to the reality of what happens when you underestimate not just an opponent, but the power of a legacy built on something more durable than profit margins. I arrived at Heartland's main operations center, formerly Reynolds' secondary warehouse, at 5:15 a.m., just as the eastern sky began to lighten. The building hummed with pre-dawn activity as delivery drivers checked their routes, warehouse, Staff loaded trucks, and the early shift prepared for the day ahead. Everyone wore new caps and jackets emblazoned with the Heartland logo. The green and gold colors a deliberate echo of the Reynolds branding, but with a fresh, forward-looking design. "Morning, Ms. Reynolds," called out Diego, our longtime loading dock supervisor, his familiar greeting now paired with the unfamiliar uniform. "Big day today." "The biggest," I agreed, accepting the coffee he offered. "How's the team feeling?" "Ready," he replied with confident certainty. "Everyone's on board. Word spread fast after yesterday's announcement, and the drivers are saying customers have been calling them directly to confirm their deliveries will still be coming." This was the advantage of deep community roots. When people trusted the individuals behind a business, the name on the trucks mattered far less than the people driving them. Teresa met me at the entrance to the command center we'd established in what had previously been a conference room. Multiple screens displayed real-time tracking of delivery vehicles, inventory status, and incoming orders. Maya had worked through the night with her IT team to ensure all systems transitioned smoothly. "First deliveries leave in 30 minutes, Teresa reported, handing me a tablet displaying the day's operational dashboard. "We've prioritized key accounts, the larger farms with time-sensitive needs, and the co-op members who stood with us yesterday." I scrolled through the data, noting the careful organization behind today's rollout. "Any system issues overnight?" "Minor authentication hiccups around 2 a.m., Maya replied, joining us with the slightly disheveled look of someone who had worked straight through the night. "Cortland's IT team attempted to access our database backups. They were denied, of course, but they're becoming more aggressive in their digital probing. They're discovering how little they actually purchased," I noted, unsurprised by their tactics. "What about communication channels?" "All customer service lines are now routing through Heartland systems," Teresa confirmed. "The old Reynolds numbers forward callers to our new center with a brief recorded message explaining the transition. Our representatives have been thoroughly briefed on how to handle questions." The atmosphere in the command center blended tension and excitement, the culmination of months of careful planning now being tested in real-world conditions. I moved among the various stations, checking details and offering encouragement to team members who had committed themselves to this high-risk transition. At precisely 6 a.m., the first fleet of Heartland delivery trucks pulled out of the Yao loading bays, their freshly painted logos gleaming in the early morning light. I watched from the upper window as they dispersed across the region, carrying not just agricultural supplies, but also the message that community values had prevailed over corporate consolidation. "First social media updates are hitting," Maya called out, pointing to another screen where mentions of Heartland were already appearing. Local farmers were posting photos of the new trucks arriving at their properties, many with appreciative comments about service continuity and support for local ownership. My phone buzzed with a text from Hank. "First Heartland delivery just arrived. Everything perfect, right on schedule. The Cortland vultures won't find any scraps to fight over here." The operations center settled into a rhythm of controlled urgency as the morning progressed. Each successful delivery, each system functioning properly, each customer conversion represented another brick in the foundation of our new enterprise. By 9 a.m., we had completed 37% of the day's scheduled deliveries without a single major issue. "Victoria," Mr. Donovan called from the doorway, "we have visitors at the front entrance. Cortland's legal team, accompanied by your uncle." I had been expecting this first countermove. Direct confrontation rather than a formal legal filing. Interesting choice. "They're hoping to catch us off guard," Mr. Donovan observed, demanding immediate access to their inventory and customer data. "Let's not keep them waiting," I replied, straightening my jacket. Unlike yesterday's deliberately understated outfit, today I wore a professional suit that projected confidence and authority. No more hiding my capabilities or diminishing my presence to meet others' expectations. The main reception area had been transformed overnight, with Heartland signage and colors replacing the familiar Reynolds branding. Nancy, who had transferred to Heartland along with most of the administrative staff, sat calmly at the front desk despite the tension emanating from the group before her. Walsh stood alongside two corporate attorneys I didn't recognize, while Uncle Philip paced behind them with barely contained fury. All four looked as though they had slept little, if at all. "Ms. Reynolds," Walsh began, his tone clipped and formal. "We're here to address several critical compliance issues regarding the transfer of assets from Reynolds Agricultural Supply." "Good morning, Mr. Walsh," I replied with professional courtesy. "I understand yesterday's revelations must have been quite unsettling." "Unsettling would be a significant understatement," one of the attorneys interjected, stepping forward with a leather portfolio. "I'm Barbara Winters, Chief Legal Officer for Cortland Agribusiness. We have serious concerns about the legality of the asset transfers preceding yesterday's acquisition." "As do I," Uncle Philip added, unable to contain himself. "This elaborate shell game won't stand up to legal scrutiny." Mr. Donovan, who had silently taken position beside me, responded with calm precision. "I assume you've reviewed the corporate structure documentation we provided yesterday. All transfers were executed with full board authorization, including yours, Mr. Reynolds." "Authorization obtained through deliberate obfuscation," Winters countered. "The board was not properly informed about the nature of these transfers." "The board," I noted, "had a fiduciary duty to understand what they were approving. The quarterly reports clearly labeled these entities and transactions. Your client chose not to inquire about details that were readily available to him." Walsh stepped forward, attempting a more conciliatory approach. "Victoria, surely we can find a reasonable solution here. This confrontational approach benefits no one. Cortland is prepared to discuss acquiring Heartland as well, under favorable terms." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied evenly. "Heartland is not for sale at any price." Uncle Philip made a dismissive gesture. "This isn't about money for her. It's about some misguided notion of preserving Samuel's legacy. She doesn't understand the business realities." The irony of his statement, coming from someone who had never bothered to learn the fundamental operations of the company he'd tried to sell, was almost painful. "Actually," I countered, "it's precisely because I understand the business realities that Heartland exists. Reynolds Agricultural Supply's value came from its supplier relationships, customer loyalty, and community integration. All elements your acquisition strategy typically dismantles in favor of short-term profit extraction." Winters consulted her notes. "Our position is that the asset transfers constituted fraudulent conveyance, executed specifically to diminish the value of Reynolds prior to our acquisition." Mr. Donovan's expression remained impassive. "An interesting theory, but legally unsupportable. The transfers began 5 years ago, long before any acquisition discussions. They were properly documented, appropriately valued, and correctly reported in financial statements. Most importantly, they were executed with full board approval." He gestured toward a conference room. "If you'd like to discuss specific legal concerns, we're happy to accommodate a more detailed conversation. However, I should note that any litigation would necessarily include extensive discovery regarding Cortland's acquisition practices and Mr. Reynolds's communications with your company while his brother was still alive." The implied threat hung in the air. Uncle Philip's early communications with Cortland, planning to sell the company against Grandpa's explicit wishes while he was still alive, would be devastating if exposed in legal proceedings. Walsh and Winters exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their position. Corporate legal battles required certainty and clean hands, neither of which they possessed in this situation. "Perhaps," Winters conceded after a moment, "we should review our options more thoroughly before proceeding." "A wise approach," Mr. Donovan agreed. "In the meantime, Heartland has delivery schedules to maintain. The agricultural community doesn't stop for corporate disputes." As if to emphasize this point, the The front doors opened to admit Frank Miller and several other farmers from the co-op leadership. They paused briefly, taking in the confrontation before approaching the reception desk. "Morning, Victoria," Frank called cheerfully, deliberately ignoring the Cortland contingent. "Just stopping by to sign our new supply contracts. The Heartland delivery arrived right on schedule this morning. Excellent service as always." The pointed display of customer loyalty wasn't lost on anyone present. Walsh's expression tightened as he watched the farmers, the very customers he thought he had purchased, openly aligning with Heartland. "We'll be in touch very soon," he said tersely, gesturing for his legal team to withdraw. This situation remains far from resolved. As they turned to leave, Uncle Philip lingered, his anger now tinged with something that looked almost like uncertainty. For the first time since Grandpa's death, he seemed to be recognizing that his assumptions about me, and perhaps about the business itself, had been fundamentally flawed. "You won't be able to run this operation alone," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You don't have the experience." "I'm not running it alone," I replied, gesturing to the busy office around us. "I'm running it with the same dedicated team that made Reynolds successful, the team you never bothered to get to know or value." He had no response to this simple truth. After a moment, he turned and followed the Cortland executives out the door, his shoulders slightly slumped in a way I had never seen before. Once they were gone, Frank approached with a knowing smile. "Round one goes to Heartland, I'd say." "Just the first of many," I acknowledged. "They won't give up easily." "Neither will we," he assured me, gesturing to his fellow farmers. The co-op vote was unanimous last night. Full support for Heartland, immediate transfer of all accounts. We know which side our bread is buttered on. The rest of the morning brought a steady stream of customers finalizing their transition to Heartland, farmers, construction companies, landscaping businesses, and others who depended on our agricultural supplies. Many brought stories of urgent calls from Cortland representatives overnight, offering substantial discounts and incentives to remain with Reynolds. Few had accepted these desperate offers. Most understood that short-term discounts wouldn't compensate for the long-term consequences of allowing a corporate conglomerate to establish monopoly control over their essential supplies. By noon, Maya's dashboard showed 82% of active accounts had already formally transferred to Heartland. The Reynolds Shell Company's customer base was evaporating more rapidly than even our most optimistic projections had anticipated. Regional Agricultural Association just endorsed the transition, Teresa reported, handing me yet another positive update. They're issuing a formal statement supporting continued local ownership of essential agricultural infrastructure. Community after community was aligning with our vision, not because of clever marketing or financial incentives, but because they recognized the fundamental values that had always guided Reynolds were continuing under the Heartland name. After reviewing the midday operational reports, I took a moment to visit the warehouse floor, where the afternoon delivery fleet was being loaded. The workers moved with purpose and pride, many stopping briefly to exchange words of encouragement or share positive feedback from customers they had already visited. Diego approached as I surveyed the activity, his expression thoughtful. "Your grandfather used to do this every day, you know. Walk the floor, talk to everyone, make sure we all understood we weren't just moving products but supporting a whole way of life." "I remember," I said, smiling at the memory of following Grandpa through these same routines as a child. "He always said the business operated on relationships, not transactions." "Exactly right," Diego nodded. "That's why everyone transferred to Heartland without hesitation. We're not just preserving jobs, we're preserving purpose." As I returned to the command center, my phone buzzed with a notification from the local business journal. The headline made me pause mid-step. Cortland stock falls 7% following failed acquisition revelation. The financial markets were already responding to news of the Hollow purchase. Cortland's reputation for shrewd acquisitions had taken a significant hit, with analyst reports questioning their due diligence processes and expressing concern about leadership decision-making. For a company built on aggressive expansion through acquisition, this public failure represented more than just a financial setback. It threatened their entire growth strategy. Other potential acquisition targets would now scrutinize Cortland's offers with heightened skepticism and more thorough investigation. "Victoria," Maya called as I re-entered the command center. "You need to see this." She pulled up security, camera footage from the Reynolds flagship store, the one location that had remained with the shell company under the acquisition agreement. The scene was stark. Empty shelves, confused customers, and a single Cortland manager attempting to explain the situation to increasingly frustrated farmers. "They have no inventory," Maya explained unnecessarily. "All the supplier contracts transferred to us, so they can't restock without establishing new supplier relationships from scratch." Another screen showed a local news crew setting up outside the store, preparing to report on the bizarre situation of an agricultural supply company with no actual supplies. The swift collapse of the shell company was unfolding exactly as we had anticipated, perhaps even more dramatically. Without inventory, customer relationships, or experienced staff, Reynolds' agricultural supply under Cortland ownership had become little more than an empty building with a familiar name. "Their leadership team just arrived at the airport," Teresa reported, checking another update. "Cortland's CEO and board chairman flew in personally. This has escalated beyond regional management." The escalation was predictable but still significant. Corporate leadership wouldn't commit their personal time unless they recognized this situation as a serious threat requiring their direct intervention. "Prepare for a more sophisticated counterattack," I instructed the team. "They'll move beyond legal threats to strategic responses, potentially including acquisition attempts against our suppliers, targeted recruitment of our key personnel, and aggressive outreach to our largest customers." The command center team nodded, already planning countermeasures for these anticipated moves. We had gamed out these scenarios repeatedly during our preparation phases, developing specific response protocols for each potential threat. As afternoon turned to evening, the first day of Heartland's official existence was proving to be an unqualified success. Every operational metric exceeded targets, customer transition rates surpassed our projections, and community support continued to build through social media and local news coverage. I took a moment to step outside as the sun began to set, watching as the evening delivery fleet returned from their routes. The drivers waved as they passed, many offering thumbs-up gestures or confident smiles. Despite the tension and uncertainty of this massive transition, there was a palpable sense of pride and purpose among the team. My phone rang, Hank calling with his end-of-day assessment from the agricultural community's perspective. "You've pulled off something remarkable today," he said without preamble. "Not just preserving the business, but strengthening it. Farmers who were considering switching to larger suppliers are coming back, saying they want to support what you're building." "What Grandpa built," I corrected gently. "I'm just ensuring it continues." "He laid the foundation," Hank acknowledged. "But this adaptation, creating Heartland from the bones of Reynolds while outmaneuvering both your family and Cortland, that's all you, Victoria. Samuel would be the first to say so." As twilight deepened into evening, I returned to the command center for final reports. The day's execution had been nearly flawless, a testament to both careful planning and the commitment of a team united by shared values and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Cortland regrouped and developed more sophisticated countermoves. My family, too, would likely seek ways to undermine what we had built, whether through legal challenges or community pressure. But tonight, as I reviewed the day's successes and prepared for tomorrow's battles, I felt a deep certainty that we had already won the most important victory, preserving not just a business, but a vision of commerce built on community, relationships, and long-term sustainability rather than exploitation and short-term profit. The path forward was clear, The team was committed, and most importantly, the values that had built Reynolds Agricultural Supply would continue to thrive under the Heartland name. 1 month after Heartland Agricultural Partners officially launched, I stood in the newly completed headquarters building, watching the morning sun illuminate the central atrium. The space featured a floor-to-ceiling mural depicting the agricultural history of our region, from family homesteads to modern farming innovations, with Grandpa's original storefront prominently featured in the timeline. The board members will be arriving in 30 minutes, Teresa reminded me, handing over the final quarterly report. First official meeting as Heartland. Is the Farmers Advisory Council joining us? I asked, flipping through the impressively positive numbers. They'll be here at 11 after the formal board session, she confirmed. Hank says they've prepared some expansion recommendations based on feedback from the co-op. This new governance structure, a traditional corporate board balanced by an agricultural advisory council with real input into strategic decisions, represented one of the most significant departures from the Reynolds model. Grandpa had always valued farmer input informally, but institutionalizing their voice in company decisions had strengthened community buy-in beyond our most optimistic projections. The quarterly results exceeded targets across all divisions, Lindsay reported, joining us with additional financial summaries. Revenue is 24% above projections, customer retention hit 97%, and new account acquisition is triple what we anticipated. The numbers told a remarkable story of resilience and growth. Far from struggling through a difficult transition, Heartland had thrived in its first month of operation, capitalizing on the goodwill generated by our stand against corporate consolidation. And Reynolds? I asked, referring to the hollow shell my family had sold to Cortland. Lindsay's expression held no satisfaction, merely professional assessment. They ceased operations entirely last week. The flagship store has been closed since day 12 when they couldn't secure adequate inventory. Cortland has filed insurance claims alleging misrepresentation in the acquisition, but their initial submissions have been rejected by underwriters. The collapse had been swift and comprehensive. Without inventory, supplier relationships, or customer loyalty, the Reynolds shell had become unsustainable almost immediately. Cortland had attempted to stanch the bleeding by rushing an emergency inventory from their other subsidiaries, but farmers had overwhelmingly chosen to transfer their business to Heartland instead. Any word on the litigation front? I asked Mr. Donovan, who had just arrived with his usual impeccable timing. Cortland's legal strategy is crumbling, he reported with quiet satisfaction. Their outside counsel has recommended against pursuing claims against Heartland or the asset transfers. The preliminary discovery revealed too many vulnerabilities on their side, particularly regarding their communications with your uncle while your grandfather was still alive. The fear of those communications becoming public record had effectively neutralized Cortland's most aggressive legal options. Corporate entities rarely pursued litigation when it risked exposing their own questionable practices to public scrutiny. And my family? I asked, though I already knew most of the answer. Mr. Donovan's expression softened slightly. Your Uncle Philip has accepted a position with a financial services firm in the city, significantly below his previous status. Ryan has apparently burned through his portion of the acquisition payment already and is seeking investors for another startup venture. Melissa has been notably quiet. I believe she's left the region entirely. I nodded, feeling no particular satisfaction in their struggles. Their choices had led to natural consequences, consequences Grandpa had foreseen with remarkable clarity. Victoria, Maya called from across the atrium. You should see this. She gestured to her tablet, displaying a breaking business news story. Cortland Agribusiness announces CEO resignation amid restructuring. Daniel Walsh steps down following failed Reynolds acquisition and shareholder concerns. The corporate fallout had reached the top. Walsh's reputation for shrewd acquisitions had been irreparably damaged by the Reynolds debacle, with shareholders questioning both his judgment and the company's due diligence processes. The financial impact, between the wasted acquisition payment and the subsequent stock decline, had cost Cortland nearly $100 million in value. They're scaling back their acquisition strategy, Maya noted, scrolling through the article. Board chairman states they'll focus on organic growth rather than consolidation for the foreseeable future. One failed acquisition had fundamentally altered the trajectory of a corporate giant that had been systematically dismantling family-owned agricultural businesses across the region for years. The ripple effects would benefit countless rural communities beyond our own. As I prepared for the board meeting, taking one final moment in my office to review the quarterly presentation, I found myself drawn to the photograph of Grandpa that now held pride of place on my desk. Unlike the formal portrait in the lobby, this was a candid shot, Grandpa kneeling in a field beside a young farmer, both examining soil samples with identical expressions of thoughtful concentration. The moment captured everything that had made Reynolds Agricultural Supply different from its corporate competitors: genuine partnership, knowledge sharing, and the understanding that supporting farmers meant more than simply selling them products. A knock at my door interrupted this reflection. "They're ready for you in the boardroom," Teresa announced, "and there's someone here you might want to meet first." She stepped aside to reveal a young woman in her early 20s, somewhat hesitant, but with a determined set to her shoulders that seemed vaguely familiar. "This is Sophia Reynolds," Teresa introduced. "Philip's daughter." I hadn't seen my cousin since Grandpa's funeral, where she had stood quietly apart from her father's. Obvious calculations about the inheritance. Unlike Ryan and Melissa, Sophia had always been somewhat removed from family gatherings, pursuing her own path with little fanfare or family support. "Sophia," I greeted her, genuinely surprised. "Please, come in." Teresa discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her as Sophia entered, her gaze taking in the office with evident curiosity. "I've been following what happened," she began without preamble. "With Dad and Reynolds and everything, it's been illuminating." "I imagine it has," I replied carefully, unsure of her purpose. "Family revelations usually are." She nodded, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I wanted you to know that not all of us were part of what they tried to do. Dad never discussed business. With me, he always said I had my head in the clouds because I studied environmental science instead of business." This aligned with what little I knew of Sophia, that she had chosen a different path from the rest of the family, focusing on education and personal development rather than status or quick financial gains. "I'm finishing my master's in sustainable agricultural practices," she continued. "My thesis focuses on helping family farms adapt to climate change through modified growing techniques and resource management." The relevance to Heartland's mission wasn't lost on me. "That sounds like valuable work." "It is," she agreed, a hint of passion breaking through her composed exterior. "But academic research only goes so far. These innovations need practical implementation partners who actually work with farmers daily." She hesitated, then pressed on. "I've been offered a position with an agricultural technology firm in the city, but before I accepted, I wanted to explore possibilities closer to home." The implication was clear but delicately presented, a request without presumption, an olive branch extended with appropriate humility. "You're wondering if Heartland might have use for your expertise," I suggested, helping her articulate the unspoken question. "Yes," she acknowledged. "Not because we're family. I know that means little after what happened, but because I believe in what you're building here. What Grandpa started and you're carrying forward." I studied her with new interest, recognizing something of Grandpa's quiet determination in her expression. Unlike her father and cousins, Sophia had developed her own expertise in a field directly relevant to our agricultural community's future challenges. "We're actually establishing a sustainability division," I told her. focused on helping our customer farms adapt to changing environmental conditions and regulatory requirements. The director position is open." Her expression brightened with genuine interest. "That sounds exactly like what I've been working toward." "It won't be easy," I cautioned. "Your family name might be an initial obstacle with some community members. You'd need to establish trust through expertise and commitment, not relationship." "I understand," she replied with quiet confidence. "I'm prepared to earn my place based on contribution, not birthright. That's all I'm asking for. The opportunity to try." Her words echoed Grandpa's core philosophy so precisely that I found myself smiling. Perhaps the Reynolds legacy would continue through more branches of the family tree than I had anticipated. "Submit your resume formally," I advised. "And we'll arrange an interview with the Agricultural Advisory Council. If they support your candidacy, I'll back their recommendation." Her grateful expression confirmed I'd made the right decision. Unlike the entitlement her father and cousins had displayed, Sophia sought only a fair chance to prove her value. After she left to complete her application, I made my way to the boardroom, where Heartland's leadership team awaited the quarterly meeting. The space was designed differently from Reynolds' formal mahogany-paneled room, more accessible and collaborative, with agricultural maps and community growth metrics prominently displayed alongside financial projections. The discussion that followed covered not just profits and market share, but community impact metrics, sustainability initiatives, and long-term resilience planning. The questions focused on how our decisions would affect family farms, rural communities, and regional agricultural self-sufficiency. Exactly the considerations Grandpa had always prioritized, but had struggled to institutionalize in the face of my family's narrower financial focus. After the formal board session concluded, the Farmers Advisory Council joined us, bringing practical field experience and community perspective to our strategic planning. Their input wasn't merely ceremonial. Several key initiatives had originated. From council recommendations, drawing on generations of agricultural knowledge that no corporate algorithm could replicate. At the conclusion of this expanded session, Hank remained behind as the others filed out, his weathered face creased in a satisfied smile. "Samuel would be bursting with pride if he could see this," he observed, gesturing to the collaborative energy still lingering in the room. "You've built something even stronger than what he passed to you." "We've built it together," I corrected him. "Heartland exists because an entire community recognized the value of what Grandpa created and chose to preserve it." "True enough," Hank acknowledged. "But communities need leaders who can translate shared values into practical action. That's what you've provided, just like your grandfather did before you." As afternoon turned to evening, I found myself drawn to visit the site of Grandpa's original store, now a small agricultural museum maintained by the Historical Society. The modest building where Reynolds Agricultural Supply had begun 60 years earlier stood as a testament to how significant enterprises could grow from humble beginnings when guided by genuine purpose. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Court dismisses Cortland's claims against former Reynolds shareholders. The legal saga had reached its anticlimactic conclusion. Cortland's attempt to recover some portion of their losses from my family had failed, leaving them to absorb the full financial impact of their ill-considered acquisition. I felt no particular satisfaction in this development. My family had already paid the most meaningful price for their actions, the loss of connection to Grandpa's legacy and their standing in the community that had once respected the Reynolds name. Financial penalties would have been redundant. As I stood before the original storefront, I noticed a familiar figure approaching from the town square, Mr. Donovan, looking somehow both professional and relaxed in the evening light. "I thought I might find you here," he said, joining me in contemplation of the historic building. "Significant day, with the court dismissal and Sophia's application." "Full circle in many ways," I agreed, "though I suspect Cortland isn't finished with us entirely." "No," he conceded. But they've lost their most potent weapons: legal leverage and market dominance. Whatever comes next will be more nuanced, less direct. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the setting sun cast long shadows across the historical marker describing Grandpa's founding of Reynolds Agricultural Supply in more idealistic times. "Your grandfather told me once," Mr. Donovan said thoughtfully, "that the true measure of business success wasn't profit margins or market share, but whether your enterprise left the community stronger than you found it." By that standard, he was remarkably successful, I observed. "As are you," Mr. Donovan replied. "Heartland has already strengthened this community in ways Reynolds might never have achieved under different leadership." The subtle compliment acknowledged what we both knew, that preserving Grandpa's legacy had required transforming it into something new, something that maintained his core values while adapting to changing circumstances. As twilight deepened into evening, my phone buzzed with messages from the Heartland team, updates on tomorrow's operations, customer feedback reports, and routine logistics that required attention. The day-to-day reality of running an agricultural supply company hadn't changed, despite the dramatic events of the past month. What had changed was the underlying purpose and governance structure, the institutional commitment to balancing profitability with community impact, the formal incorporation of agricultural perspectives into leadership decisions, and the transparent accountability to those we served. In outmaneuvering my family's attempt to sell Grandpa's legacy, I hadn't merely preserved what existed, I had created the opportunity to evolve it into something even more aligned with his original vision. Heartland wasn't just Reynolds Agricultural Supply under a new name. It was the next generation of his founding principles, adapted for contemporary challenges. As I drove back to the farmhouse that evening, still my home and now Heartland's spiritual center, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. From the moment of Grandpa's death to the establishment of Heartland as a thriving enterprise, every step had been guided by the values and strategic thinking he had instilled in me. The lights of the farmhouse glowed warmly in the darkness as I approached, a beacon of continuity amid change. Inside, on the study wall, hung Grandpa's favorite quotation, hand-carved in cherry wood. "The true inheritance is not what we receive, but what we do with what we've been given." In the end, that was the essence of what had transpired. My family had seen Grandpa's legacy as something to liquidate for personal gain. I had recognized it as a responsibility to nurture and evolve for community benefit. The consequences of those divergent perspectives had played out exactly as Grandpa had anticipated. His contingency plan hadn't just protected his life's work from those who failed to value it properly. It had created the opportunity for that work to grow into something even more significant under the stewardship of those who truly understood its purpose. As I settled at his desk, my desk now, to review tomorrow's priorities, I felt not the burden of inheritance, but the empowerment of purpose. Grandpa's backup plan hadn't just preserved a business, it had ensured that the values behind that business would continue to strengthen the community he had served for 6 decades. That was the true legacy. Not buildings or balance sheets or brand names, but the positive impact on countless lives throughout our agricultural region. Heartland would continue that legacy, not as a monument to the past, but as a living embodiment of principles that remained as relevant today as when Grandpa had first opened his modest supply store 60 years earlier. My family had sold what they thought was Grandpa's business, never understanding that his true business, the relationships, trust, and community support he had built over decades, could not be purchased. It could only be earned day by day, decision by decision, through actions that consistently prioritized long-term community welfare over short-term personal gain. That understanding was the most valuable inheritance Grandpa had left me, and, unlike the company itself, it was something that could never be sold to the highest bidder. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.